There is absolutely a right and wrong path to approach this trade deadline, and I fear that the Flames are going down the very unattractive approach.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I am your host, Jess Belmosto, and thank you so much for joining me. Today, we kick off our trade deadline week coverage with a recap of this weekend and why the Flames do not need to be buying at the deadline, as well as why the approach to this specific trade deadline matters, and why on earth are they making calls on Brandon Carlo if they're not looking to trade Rasmus Andersson. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We're here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week, your Calgary Flames every day, and let's dive right into it. Holy smokes, this weekend's hockey was bad. They've lost 3 in a row at this point. They've lost 3 in a row. Tampa, Florida, and then Carolina. Bad. It was very tough hockey to watch. It was not even like I couldn't make excuses and be like, oh, okay, yeah, like I get why they let that goal happen, or oh yeah, no, I get why they weren't able to score there. The other team's goalie just read them too. No, they just played really bad hockey. And I think that Dustin Wolf and Dan Vladar honestly deserve a gold medal, a steak dinner, and an expensive bottle of wine or liquor of their choosing, because they have had to carry this team through the 4 games of this 6-game road trip so far. And I mean, they can only do so much. You aren't winning games if you can't score a goal. And the fact that they went 9 periods, or just about 9 periods, without scoring a single goal is crazy. Scoring 1 goal over 9 periods and a little bit of overtime hockey is disgraceful. How are you going to sit there and tell me that, oh, we're a playoff team, we can make the playoffs, when you can't score a single goal? Like, do you know that if you would likely be packing it up and going home if that was a playoff series? If these last 3 games were playoff series, you'd be going home. You lost 1, you lost 2, you scored in 1, but hey, guess what? You still lost that one too. It is just embarrassing. I don't like the way that this is all unfolding before the trade deadline, because I do fear that it could lead management and the decision makers to thinking, okay, in order to fix this, we just need to add a good scorer. Okay, guess what you're not getting without giving up essential assets? A good scorer. Do you know what you're not going to be doing? Most likely making a true playoff run. Why don't we pump the brakes, throw it in park? And you know what? For the sake of this management group, I'm pulling the e-brake. They can't be making any frivolous moves this deadline. I'm sorry. It is just unacceptable. I feel like I'm spiraling talking about it. And it's kind of like a representation of what this organization is going to continue to do if they don't get themselves under control, because they are just making the same mistakes. You can say, oh, Brad Treliving was a bad general manager. Yes, you can. But at the end of the day, if Craig Conroy is not making any really different decisions, is he any better of a general manager when it's the guys above him signing his check that are calling these shots? Because that is where we're at. Nothing about this organization is truly going to change unless the real decision makers can get behind any sort of change. And I think Craig Conroy has this vision. He absolutely does. I think that we have seen him execute it pretty well so far, but this trade deadline is a lot scarier than last trade deadline because we knew that they were going to be sellers. I don't think they've decided what they want to do. And we're less than 4 days away from Friday at 3:00. Like, there's just no way this happens. They're going to go out and make the same mistakes. And then we're going to talk about it next year and say, oh, well, if the Flames hadn't given up that draft pick for some third liner that, out of Seattle, like, why is Brandon Tanev on people's radar? The Flames don't need more of that skill set. They have that already. We don't need more middle six players. They need top six players. Realistically, they need a top line. And you're not gonna get that at the trade deadline. You're just not. You're not gonna be able to fully assemble a competitive hockey team at the trade deadline. And no matter what management tries to tell themselves, this team is just not ready for the playoffs. And these last 3 games should be enough to kind of, let anyone see that and say that, like, okay, like, you can only score 1 goal through 9 periods of hockey. Do you really want them going out there and doing that in April and embarrassing themselves? Are you sure? Are you sure? I just don't think that this team needs to give up any draft assets. I think that they should be collecting those assets by being a broker, by being the third team in whatever trade, however many trades they see fit, have the cap space. And coming up next, we're going to talk about why the approach matters and what the biggest takeaways from 32 Thoughts are with Elliot Friedman. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling full longer. I love Wonderful Pistachios because they are good on the go. I can have them at work when I don't get a real lunch break. I can have them out on a day at the beach. I can have them when I have late night hockey coverage, or I just need a little extra fuel to get me through covering this hockey team. Get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and making Locked On Flames part of your day. Make sure you're following me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Jess Belmosto. We have known for some time that the Flames aren't going to be moving on from Blake Coleman, Nazem Kadri, Rasmus Andersson, or Mackenzie Weegar. And Conroy has made that abundantly clear. I think that it's silly to not take phone calls on some of these players, mainly Coleman and Kadri. I think you should be taking phone calls on all of them, except Mackenzie Weegar. I do. I know that's probably going to ruffle some feathers, but this team is in the business of getting better. Guess what you get when you trade a player like Nazem Kadri? You get a first-round pick. Guess what happens when you trade Rasmus Andersson? We saw what Seth Jones brought back for Chicago, Spencer Knight in a first. Imagine what Andersson could get. And I think that Conroy needs to open his eyes and maybe put the blinders on and not think about player loyalty for a second. And I know that I've been harsh on Vegas in the past for not really having, any dignity and not pulling any punches and just kind of being vicious, but maybe the Flames just need to do it once and rip off the Band-Aid. I understand wanting to be, a guy's guy, that looks out for their players, but I feel like at some point you really have to look at the best interest of the team. I mean, you did it with Mangiapane, even though you knew that a long-term deal wasn't going to happen there. Think of what you could get in return. I'm sorry, but Rasmus Andersson's play is already on the decline, and his contract would not even kick in until a year after next, when he is 30 years old. And I just don't necessarily think it's a wise idea for the Flames to get involved in yet another long-term contract for an overly I don't want to say old player, because that's really mean, because he's younger than me, but a player that is not necessarily at that point in his career where he needs to be with the team for another 7 or 8 years. And I hate saying that because I love Rasmus Andersson. I think that he plays very well when he's on, but when he's off, it's not great. I think that he brings a lot of passion to the locker room and a lot of the intangibles that coaches love, and he loves the community. Great, but I don't know what you're doing if you're like really willing to miss out on calls to see what you might get in return, especially if it's someone like a young right-handed center. But I guess that Joel Hanley and Miramonov are going to potentially be on the move as well. Miramonov has not had a great season. He was acquired last year in the Chris Tanev trade, but he just has not been good this year. He has just played horribly defensively. I think that with, it's one of the situations why I think the Flames defensive group just needs a true like overhaul and upgrade, because you can put a player with Mackenzie Weegar, but that doesn't mean that they're going to play like Mackenzie Weegar. Sometimes it's like putting lipstick on a pig, and we have seen that. And I think that Kevin Ball has definitely gotten better playing with Rasmus Andersson, but at times it sort of resembles that. I do think Miramonov is a lot worse of a player than Kevin Ball. So I wouldn't be shocked if you do see him on the move. Joel Hanley would be a fantastic ad for any contending team looking for defensive depth, especially going into the postseason, and players get hurt and you need them to rotate in. I think Joel Hanley is a fantastic option there. He has been stellar defensively really all season, but also as of late, which I think is what matters the most, because sell high, obviously, but also are we is a team going to take a chance on a streaky player that's kind of low right now? No, I don't think so. But I do look forward to see what other moves are made. I do wonder if they maybe get some calls about Jake Bean. I think really they should be taking calls for anybody on the defensive group not named Mackenzie Weegar. That doesn't mean you have to trade all of them. I'm just saying, maybe entertain some phone calls. That's all you have to do. Get in that general manager's group chat and say, who want me? And send a picture of a screenshot of your defensive pairings, because I'm sure people will just laugh react. But in all seriousness, I do think that how the Flames approach this deadline sets another tone for this rebuild. We had a great trade deadline last season. We had a solid draft, a steal of a draft, and a pretty good offseason and free agency approach. And now, we're moving on to this next benchmark, into this next chapter, I guess. And I think there's a lot less uncertainty about it and what the Flames are actually going to do. I don't care that this team is still in the running for a playoff spot. They're also not too far out of a top 10 draft pick spot. So realistically, this is why it's so hard to declare a direction for the Flames, because it's just okay, if we do one thing right, we can just gun it to the finish line. Or, oh no, but if we take a step back, that might not be as good. It's going to set things back even further. But it's just had you done this in the summer of 2022, it would be very different. Once you found out Tkachuk and Gaudreau were gone, you should have been making moves. You should have been making phone calls. And you didn't. And once again, that puts you here in a very unfortunate situation. If the Flames really want to be a playoff team sooner rather than later, they need to be open-minded and making hard decisions. This isn't about making friends. It's not. And that stinks to say, but at some point, the Flames just have to pull some punches and make tough decisions, collect your assets, and become a contending team. For real this time. Coming up next, we're going to talk about why the Flames might be entertaining Brandon Carlo and what another right-handed defenseman would add to this current defensive group. Thanks everyone for tuning in and hanging out with me today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. We're here for you Monday through Friday, 5 days a week. Your Calgary Flames every day. And when I saw the report that Craig Conroy and co. had been in touch with Don Sweeney of the Boston Bruins regarding Brandon Carlo, I thought, why? Brandon Carlo is a 28-year-old right-handed defenseman. The Flames don't need another right-handed defenseman, especially one that can play top minutes, unless you are trading Rasmus Andersson. But I thought we weren't doing that. So what is the rationale behind this? Is this just kind of like a backup plan? Hey, we might be doing something. Keep us in mind if you hear this report go out. I don't understand. But the only way this trade makes sense is if you are sending Rasmus Andersson back to Boston. Also, hi, if you're watching on YouTube, this is my new kitty cat. His name's Willie. He's 8 months old and will be joining the show from time to time. But it just does not make sense to me. I don't know what you're doing. You need to be moving out defensemen before adding more defensemen. I think Brandon Carlo is a very good defenseman. But what are you doing? It doesn't make sense to me. And it also doesn't entirely make sense to me if the Bruins are still hoping to make the playoffs and he's one of the only healthy defensemen. I really don't. I don't know what you're doing. And the only way this trade, again, makes sense is if you're moving Rasmus Andersson. What are you giving up for Brandon Carlo? Because not necessarily the biggest needle mover. Love Bambi. Great guy. But he's not going to do much for this Flames team that already has so much right-handed defenseman depth. And they are in desperate need of integrating their younger defensive prospects into the lineup. They don't need to be doing any of this. They should be the third team. They should be brokers. Do I think that the Flames should maybe be calling about players like Trent Frederick or like Morgan Geekie? Yeah. We know that the Bruins are looking to sell. Why not? You could certainly use some offensive help, and I don't necessarily think that you're jumping the gun with either of those two ads. I think that it's kind of similar to the Frost and Farabee addings, where, you know, they're good pieces. I don't necessarily think either of them need a change of scenery. But I don't think their long-term vision is in Boston, so it would make sense for Don Sweeney to get them out of there while he can still get something in return. I don't necessarily have any targets for the Flames. I want them to be smart. I don't want to see them again jumping the gun because they think, oh, we got this guy who's scored 20 goals 2 seasons in a row, and it's just magically going to happen and translate to his game in Calgary. The Flames have to be methodical. It has to be the bigger picture, the long-term plan. It's not about now. And we've heard Craig Conroy talk the talk about it being for the long term, about it not being for the now, and, you know, about building a sustainably competitive hockey team. But we're not seeing that. We need to see him continue to walk that walk. You know, I think hitting a home run at the draft last year helps, but what are you doing in the meantime to continue to make sure that that happens? Because you're not going to get anywhere by floating in the middle, as we have seen. The Flames have some very difficult decisions to make, and I just would be shocked if they do trade for an established roster player, unless it's a third team sort of situation. But with the Flames, you truly never know what you're going to get from them. And I think that's why this is so scary. The impending fear of the unknown, and you might wake up Friday morning to a notification saying that they have traded for Mikko Rantanen or something, and suddenly the parade's back on. Or you see that they traded for, I don't know, some random player and gave up a second round draft pick. And you're like, oh, Brad Treliving, welcome back. But that'll do it for me on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you have a fantastic day. Remember to drink your vitamin C and avoid germs, and make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Flames so you can keep up with the trade deadline news and the latest breaking news out of Calgary. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube, and we will be back tomorrow with any rumors, updates, and trades.